Could something like, a test score really predict so much about a person's life, their job, their family? It's kind of a wild thought, isn't it?
It really is. And today we're looking at a book that dove right into that. The bell curve caused quite a stir.
Oh, definitely. The bell curve. Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life by Herrnstein and Murray. Came out in the 90s, but people still talk about it and argue about it.
Absolutely. It's, well, controversial is probably putting it mildly. Our aim today isn't really to weigh in on whether it's right or wrong.
No, exactly. We want to unpack some of its main arguments. What did they actually claim about intelligence and how it connects to things in American society?
Right. Just laying out their perspective.
And actually, for anyone listening who gets really into dissecting these kinds of complex, maybe even difficult books, there's a great YouTube channel called Mindful Moments.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they use AI analysis to kind of break down challenging texts. It's pretty neat for encouraging, deeper reflection and critical thinking. Worth checking out if this topic grabs you.
Good tip. So back to the bell curve. The core idea, really, is that intelligence, and they often mean intelligence as measured by IQ tests, is a major factor.
A major factor in what, exactly?
Well, in shaping individual lives, but also the structure of society itself. They often use data linked to the Armed Forces Qualification Test, the AFQT.
Right, the AFQT. And they saw that as a good measure of general intelligence.
Exactly. They described it as highly G-loaded, which is jargon for saying it measures that general cognitive ability factor, G, pretty well. The thing that seemed to underlie performance on lots of different mental tasks.
Okay, so they take this measure, this G or IQ, and then they look for connections, for correlations with life outcomes like education.
Precisely. Education was a big one. One of their findings, focusing on white youths, was that being smart, having a high IQ, seemed more important for getting a college degree than coming from a wealthy background.
Wait, really? More important than socioeconomic status?
That's what their analysis suggested. They gave an example, of like a student with average socioeconomic status, or SES, but whose IQ was in the top 2%.
Yeah.
Well, that student apparently had a better chance of graduating college than someone from the wealthiest 2% of families, but with just an average IQ.
Wow. Okay, so that really emphasizes the role they saw for cognitive ability.
It does. And it wasn't just about school. They looked at jobs, too.
Like getting a job or keeping one?
More about not being unemployed long term. For white men, specifically, they found higher IQ was linked to a lower chance of being out of work for long periods.
And socioeconomic background, did that matter?
Interestingly, in their analysis for that group, SES didn't seem to have a strong independent effect on long-term unemployment. Low IQ, though, seemed more strongly connected to it than to just short spells of unemployment.
They really went there, didn't they? Looking at these sensitive connections. What about family stuff?
Yes, they did. For instance, they examined the relationship between a mother's IQ and the circumstances of her first child's birth, specifically for white women.
Okay. And what did they report finding?
Their data indicated that women with higher IQs were, significantly more likely to conceive and give birth within a marriage.
Was that true across the board, or did education level play a part?
That's a good question. They actually drilled down into that. Even looking only at white women who had finished high school but not college.
Yeah.
Even in that group, they found a higher IQ significantly lowered the odds of having a first baby outside of marriage. And socioeconomic status seemed to have less of an independent impact there, comparatively speaking.
Okay. So education, employment, marriage patterns. What else? Welfare often comes up in these discussions.
It does, and they'd addressed it. Their analysis suggested a link between cognitive ability and receiving welfare benefits.
How so?
They found that if you statistically controlled for IQ differences, the gap in welfare rates between black and white individuals was cut roughly in half.
By half, wow.
And the gap between Latino and white individuals shrank even more, by something like 84% when IQ was factored in.
So the implication being that cognitive ability might be part of the explanation for those differing rates.
That's certainly one interpretation the book puts forward. But it's really important to add, they also pointed out that the statistical control didn't make the differences disappear entirely. Especially among mothers who are already poor, controlling for IQ still left a black-white disparity in welfare rates. So clearly, IQ wasn't the whole story, even in their own analysis. Other factors are definitely involved.
Right. It sounds like they also touched on parenting itself.
They did. The book argued that lower maternal IQ was associated with, let's say, more challenging home environments for children.
Challenging how?
Things like potential links to babies with more difficult temperaments, maybe poor developmental outcomes early on. They sort of floated the idea that the parents' cognitive ability, perhaps more than just their socioeconomic status, could be a key factor in parenting styles.
And how that relates to the child's development.
Yeah, and even the connection between what they called malparenting or less effective parenting and the child's own IQ. They suggested parental IQ played a bigger role than maybe previously thought compared to just SES.
This is obviously getting into some very complex and potentially fraught territory. Did they also look at crime?
Yes, that was another area. They drew on some existing criminology research, like work by Hershey and Hindling,
Okay.
and argued that, generally speaking, individuals who engage in criminal behavior tend to score substantially below average on intelligence tests.
So a correlation between lower IQ and crime.
That was the argument. They used data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, the NLSY, and reported finding a pretty consistent relationship for white males between IQ scores and how far they got into the criminal justice system. Lower IQ, deeper involvement.
And did this extend to things like political views or participation?
Sort of. They cited one study suggesting that intelligence was actually more strongly correlated with how politically aware or developed teenagers were than their family socioeconomic status was.
Interesting. More than SES.
According to that study, yes. Now, they also acknowledged other research, like work by Verba and Nee, showing a clear, strong link between SES, especially education, and political participation, like voting, engaging.
Okay, so how did they square that?
Well, later in the book, they argued that cognitive ability plays an important independent role in understanding what they call middle-class values, which they connected back to things like political awareness and participation. So SES matters, but they argued IQ matters too, separately.
We're covering a lot of the book's main points here, and maybe this is a good moment just to pause and, remind ourselves that the bell curve offers one particular and very debated lens on all this. If listeners want to dig deeper and get, frankly, a wider range of perspectives on these incredibly complex issues.
Definitely important to do that.
Yeah, resources like the Mindful Moments channel we mentioned, or exploring related podcasts and academic critiques can provide really valuable context and different viewpoints.
Absolutely critical. So to kind of pull these threads together, the bell curve essentially presents this case that intelligence, measured as IQ, correlates with a whole range of life outcomes.
Right. We've touched on education, jobs, family structure, welfare use, parenting aspects, crime.
Exactly. And even political engagement. They marshaled a lot of data to show these correlations. But, and this is the crucial part we keep coming back to.
It's the interpretation.
It's the interpretation and the conclusions drawn from those correlations. They face intense scrutiny, alternative explanations have been offered, and the debate over the role of intelligence versus environment versus systemic factors. Well, that continues.
So as we wrap up our discussion today, we've walked through some of the core arguments of the bell curve, these links it draws between intelligence and so many facets of American life. It's undeniable that these are complex and, very controversial claims.
Extremely complex. And that's really why digging into this kind of work requires a lot of careful thought.
For sure. Which leads us to encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring these important questions.
Absolutely. Don't just take our word for it or the book's word for it.
Definitely not. If you found this conversation useful, please do subscribe to keep up with our future explorations. Maybe share it with someone else who likes to grapple with tricky subjects.
And if you want to read The Bell Curve for yourself or related critiques, we can put a link in the description for purchasing options.
But really, the most important thing is to engage critically. Think about the evidence presented, yes, but also seek out counter-arguments, consider different frameworks.
And really form your own informed perspective on these incredibly sensitive and significant societal issues. It's not easy, but it's necessary.